Like, okay, now we're good. If
Okay, great. All right. So, as a lot of people have experienced, I'm sure, we're still sort of new to all this technology stuff. And just when we think we figured it out, something throws a wrench and we have to sort something new out. So, I apologize, we're starting a few minutes later than we anticipated starting, but we'll jump into things now. So welcome to our first ever FCSS live presentation. We have a series of presentations that we'll be sharing throughout the summer with the community. So if you check out our Instagram or our Facebook page, our website, we've got the list of presentations are all there and the dates that they'll be hosted. And hopefully as we work together and keep moving forward, as we go along, it'll be a little bit smoother starts and we won't have the same technical glitches as we did today. So for the presentation today, there's just a couple of things that I'll mention and as I introduce myself. So we really design these presentations to be interactive. And so what we'll invite people to do who are watching along as we ask different questions and go through different materials, that you're welcome to ask us questions in the chats if you like. So we might share some questions with the viewers, and you're welcome to answer them if you feel comfortable to do so. And if you have questions that come up or points that you'd like to share, then feel free. So I'll be doing the presentation today. My name is Jessica, and I'm a provisional psychologist in Alberta. I'm a counselor with Barron's Eureka Warner FCSS, and my moderator today is Brian. And so Brian will be kind of watching your chats. And Brian, if you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Brian Bullock. I'm a registered provisional psychologist here in Alberta with Barron's Eureka Warner FCSS. And one thing just to mention with the chat is people who are more technologically savvy than us maybe know how to do this, but we felt the thing we worked out is you have to be logged in to your Google account to chat. So if you're not seeing a chat function, that might be why. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for noting that. So yeah, you'll have to be logged into your YouTube account through your Gmail if you'd like to chat. And you don't have to. You can just kind of watch along the presentation as well. And we'll also be saving it to the website. So if you can't stay for the whole thing, but you're curious and want to check out the rest of the presentation, then it'll be saved to the YouTube page later today. And just like any of the other presentations too, if there's one that looks interesting to you, but you're just not able to watch the live stream, that's fine, because you can check it out later. And unfortunately, we won't be able to monitor the chat after the presentation is done. So if you happen to be watching this presentation and it's not the live stream version, but maybe you've just downloaded it to watch yourself later, just know that we won't be able to respond to any comments or questions after the live stream is over. We won't have access to do that. But you're welcome to contact FCSS, and I'll throw the contact information up in just a second here if you have any questions or thoughts beyond what we talk about today. Okay, so in a second here, you should see the presentation pop up, and hopefully you can still see Brian and I in the corner of your screen there. So our presentation today, we're going to be talking about the 3F's and how to find your resiliency or how to bounce back from stress when we experience some of those natural stress responses. And I'm just noticing there's a bit of a lag, so I don't want to click too many times and jump far ahead in the presentation. Okay, there we go. So like Brian and I mentioned, you are able to interact with us during the live stream using the chat function. We'd really love to hear from people who are tuning in. But there's a couple things we want you to know about the chat function before we get started. So you're welcome to jump in, but you're free also just watch along and not say anything. We'll ask that you just remember to be respectful of one another in the chats, and Brian, our moderator today, will be reviewing all the chat comments. And a reminder too that none of the comments are private, so please do what you need to do to feel comfortable chatting and protect your privacy in the way that feels good. And we encourage all the viewers to share your thoughts and ideas to the extent that feels comfortable for you. So you're in charge of how much or how little you say in the chats today. Brian, anything you would add to any of that?
No, just actually, I would note that there is between the presentation and the live stream, there's a 15-second delay. So it might get a little bit choppy in terms of responding to chat, but just as long as we're all sort of aware that that delay exists, we'll try and work with it.
Right. Yeah. So anyone who's watched some YouTube live streams before, you'll know there's a bit of a lag. And so I might ask a question, and for me, it feels like real time, but Brian's seeing me live in real time on his laptop, but then he's waiting about 15 seconds or so for some of the answers to come in. So we'll just kind of do our best, but please feel free to jump in and comment whenever you'd like. And Brian will get to you once he kind of catches up with the chats and the comments. Okay, so I want to just kind of give an outline of how we're going to spend our time together today. So we're going to talk about the 3F's, and if you're unsure what that phrase means, I'll get to that shortly. So by the end of the presentation, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And we're just going to talk about, starting to understand, is my stress response normal? And we'll share a couple of brief tips, and we'll leave some space for questions too. So at the end, if there's something that you're wondering about, then you can ask your question in the chat, and feel free to ask questions as we go through. We might not be able to answer all the questions right as you ask them, but Brian will just be keeping track. And then at the end, we'll get to as many questions as we have time for. And just another note, we were really excited about the chat function. So there's just another note on this slide too, inviting you to jump in on the chat if you'd like. And then I'll just leave this slide up for a few seconds here. So some of what we talk about today, while they're common responses and they're things that most humans will experience, we understand that at the same time, some of it can be a little bit difficult to think about or a little bit uncomfortable. And because we won't be able to respond to everything in the chat, we won't, unfortunately, just because of how the presentation's set up, we won't really be able to provide individual supports in the chats. We just wanted to make sure that there were a couple of options that you knew about in case you're just feeling like you need some extra support. So I'll just leave this slide up for another second. And that's kind of the purpose of this slide, was just to let you know that if you need support, there's lots of options out there. And the other thing to keep in mind too, is that, maybe you're watching this from outside of our area. And so if any of these numbers don't work for you, then we just invite you to use Google or whatever your favorite search engine is to just look up other supports in your area. And then here's a little bit about our program as well. So throughout the presentation, we'll have the phone numbers up for different programs that we have. So as we go through, if there's any resources you're curious about or any services we have that you're curious about, please feel free to contact any of these numbers and just get more information about what FCSS has to offer. And so I'll start now. We'll jump into our very first kind of chat comment question. And so the first check-in question that we'll do as we start the presentation is just to notice something that's in your space that's a color that you really like. If you're really lucky, maybe you can find something in your space that's your favorite color. But just kind of look over to your left and just kind of slowly scan the room and look over to your right. If you like, you can look up and down. Just kind of scan the space that you're in. And if you see something that's your favorite color, we'd love to hear what your favorite color is. Or if you'd like to share in the chat the thing that you can see that's your favorite color, you're welcome to do that. And just keep scanning the space. And so as I scan my space, something that I can see, I'm not sure how well this will show up in the video, but something I can see that I really like the color. I have this ball that sits on my desk. So as you can kind of see, sort of a rainbow colored thing. And the reason why I really like being able to see this in my space is because if any of you have met with me in my office at the Hub or in the Tabor Clinic, you'll know that I like a lot of color. And I like to have lots of color in my space. And so even as you can see, my walls behind me are gray. I'm in a space that's not quite so bright, but I can still find a way to bring a bit of color into my space. And so that's something that helps me feel good. That's a color or a color combo, I guess, that I like to see.
Yeah, I was noticing my favorite color is purple. So I have a big exercise ball in the corner that caught my eye. So it's just, yeah. Just nice to catch that.
And Brian, I can't tell, but it looks like maybe you're even wearing a purple shirt. Is that accurate?
Red.
Oh, it's not accurate at all. Too bad. That would have been kind of cool if I could see it right.
Could have been.
Yeah. So we'll just kind of keep moving along with the presentation, but feel free to jump in the chat and share something you can see that's your favorite color if you'd like to. So for the next part of the presentation, I'm going to tell a story. And so as I go through the story, if you have reactions or thoughts you'd like to share, you're welcome to do that. And we're going to kind of use our imaginations for this story. So we're going to imagine that we're going back in time to cave people times. And so if you imagine that you're going back in time to cave people times, we're going to imagine that where we live as cave people, we live kind of in a small community. And so living in this small community as a cave person, you're going to imagine that you're out in the jungle as a cave person and you're doing whatever your job is in the community. And out of the corner of your eye, you see something that's orange. So just spend a couple seconds thinking about this cave person out in the jungle. What is this cave person going to think that orange thing is? And if you have some guesses, you can throw them into the chat or just keep them to yourself. And I'm imagining the community that we live in, you know, maybe it's sort of a tightly knit community, kind of like some of the communities that FCSS serves. And maybe in our community, because it's tightly knit and we're living in cave people times, maybe we all sort of work together in the community and we all have different jobs. So some people's jobs might be to kind of stay back and take care of any babies and children. Some people might be going out to hunt for meat, or other people might be looking for some plant foods for us to eat. There might be people that are back using different resources to do things like make clothes or to, you know, create shelters and those kinds of things. So we all have different jobs in our communities. And so when you're out in the jungle and you see something orange out of the corner of your eye, you're going to be all alone probably because you're out doing your job. And so just imagine the different types of things that a cave person might imagine that orange thing to be. And I'll throw up a couple pictures here. That cave person might think that that orange thing is maybe some fire, right? So that could be a good or bad thing. Maybe it means that you're close to home and people are ready to get cooking and start the evening off. Or it could be that maybe there's another group and you're getting close to their territory and you need to back up. Or maybe your brain might tell you that orange thing is actually an orange, right? Or maybe some orange berries. That would be good news if your job is to go out and find some plants to eat, right? You might think, oh, it's the sunset. That would give you good information about what time of day it is. Or maybe you think it's something like that little orange frog we have here, kind of a small animal. But your brain might also, as a cave person, tell you that there's a tiger. And so let's think this through for a minute. If you're a cave person, and you're out on your own in the jungle, and your brain sees something orange and tells you that it's some berries when it's actually a tiger, what would happen? You'd probably get eaten. But if your brain tells you that everything orange is a tiger, even though we can see in the picture there might have been lots of options for orange things, what will wind up happening is that you might get sort of a jolt of anxiety or a jolt of stress. That's not necessary if it's not a tiger, but it's kind of a safer position to be in, right? That will keep you alive. And so what happened to the cave person we're imagining living out in the jungle is that probably that cave person's brain paired orange things with tigers or orange things with a threat. We can see why that makes sense because that cave person was just trying to stay alive. So we're going to just kind of keep moving along. We're going to think about this cave person who's maybe now seeing a tiger. And here's another option. If you'd like to throw an answer up into the chat, you're welcome to. But if you were that cave person and you saw that tiger out in the jungle by yourself, think about what your brain might tell you to do in that situation. So I share this story with lots of different groups. I feel like I've asked that question probably 10 or 15 times. And there's a couple different answers that I hear. So some people would say, Jessica, if I saw a tiger, my brain would tell me to get the heck out of there. My brain would tell me to run away or find somewhere safe to go, maybe find a cave or climb a tree. Although I know some people will say you shouldn't climb a tree if a tiger's chasing you because they can climb trees too. But some people say their brain would say, get out of there. Other people say, Jessica, my brain would tell me to throw a rock at that tiger or find a stick to whack it with, right? Some people say, I'm strong enough, I could fight a tiger. My brain would tell me to stay and fight that tiger off. I've got something that I'm doing in that space too. And so when we think about the 3F's, we've already covered 2 of them. One is fight and one is flee. And so you might have heard of this response before, the fight or flight response. So that's what we're talking about here. But there's actually another thing that can happen sometimes. And sometimes what happens is we're not quite sure if we should fight or if we should run away. And so what can happen sometimes is that the brain is sort of stuck. Do I fight? Do I run? Do I fight? Do I run? And while our brain is trying to decide, our body is getting energized to do either action. But as a backup plan, if we're not quite sure, sometimes what happens is we can go into freeze mode. Another way to think about that is like a deer in headlights mode. And so our goal is to just stay perfectly still. And so our brains will help our body just stay totally still. And the hope would be that maybe something will move off in the distance or move in another direction that will distract the tiger. Maybe the tiger won't see us and it'll go off in the other direction to find somebody else or something else to eat. And so these are all normal reactions that we all have. We're talking about this cave person story, but we're actually going to imagine, if this cave person moves into the city, maybe they move. I work mostly in Coaldale and Tabor. And so if we imagine that maybe our cave person moved into Coaldale, Alberta, I can't confirm 100%, but I'm fairly certain there's no tigers in Coaldale. Right? Our cave person would probably know that too, right? And we're even more sophisticated than a cave person would be. So our 2020 brains that can do a whole lot more than a cave person's brain ever could, that 2020 brain knows for sure that there's a pretty small chance that we're going to encounter tigers. But if that caveman part of our brain or that cave person part of our brain has paired orange things with tigers, then even though we're in Coaldale and now we know there's no tigers here, when we see something orange, it makes sense that our brain might automatically say, oh, there's a tiger. And if our brain's automatically saying, oh, there's a tiger, then our brain is going to tell us, okay, I need to fight that tiger off or I need to run away. And so, oh, I went the wrong direction. And so, like I said, this is all just part of the normal stress response. So if you're relating to what you're hearing here, just know that these are the responses that are built in, right? If you're relating to what you're hearing here, what that means is that your brain is working the way that it was designed, and that's good news. But it can be a little bit tricky because sometimes what happens is that our brain might sense a threat when a threat might not even be there. And so that brings me to another question I have. If you'd like, you can share your answer in the chats. I've got the question kind of on the bottom of the screen here. But if you had to guess how big that part of your brain is that does some of that fight or flight stuff, the part of your brain that decides, is there really a threat here? Do I need to fight or flee? Do I need to go into freeze mode, or is this okay? Yeah, just take a guess at how big that part of your brain actually is. So I'll come back to that question in a couple of seconds here. I'll just leave some time for people to make guesses if they'd like to. And I want to go back to this other idea that sometimes our brain senses a threat where there may not be one. And so we can imagine what that might look like. So if your brain has paired something orange with a tiger or with a serious threat, and maybe you're living in Coaldale and you just got a new job and you're walking from the place you're staying to your work and you have to walk past an orange billboard, that might automatically trigger your brain into that fight or flight response. And so a couple things could happen. If you're someone who goes into fight mode, you might get to work and you might already feel irritable, right? You might have a hard time getting along with some of your coworkers. You might feel more annoyed by some of the smaller things that happen in workplaces than you typically would. So you might just kind of feel more on edge because something has reminded your brain of something that was scary for you before, right? The other thing that could happen if you're the person if your response might be to flee, is that you might just totally avoid that street, and all of a sudden it takes you 45 minutes to get to work instead of 15. So maybe you wind up showing up to work late, right? Or maybe it just winds up taking you a lot more time to get where you need to go. And in a pretty like extreme example or pretty severe case, we could see how somebody, if their brain has paired orange with a serious threat, it might actually be so hard that they can't get to work at all. And so that might look like some of that freeze response, where maybe that person can't even get out of the house to get to work because their body just feels so frozen. I know that if I leave the house and go to work, there's going to be a threat between where I am now and where my work is. So we can see some of the sort of the real life 2020 consequences of these 3F responses, which are totally normal, but at the same time can cause us some troubles. And so I just want to get back to this question: how big is that part of our brain that tells us if there's a threat? And the answer to that question is that part of our brain is the size of an almond. And not even an almond in a shell, but just the meat, just the little part of the almond that you would eat. And so that part of our brain, even though it's really, really small compared to the rest of our brain, we've got these beautiful big brains in our heads that have this tiny little part that does that fight or flight thing. That part can get pretty bossy. So that's what we're going to be kind of transitioning to for the second part of our presentation, is when that little almond in our heads is starting to get really bossy, what can we do to just try and let that part of our brain know that it's not in charge all the time, right? There's certainly times where we want that part in charge, but we don't need it in charge all the time. Just before I transition into that next part, I'm just going to check in, Brian, if there's anything you want to add or anything you think I missed.
Nothing that I think you missed or added. An awesome job. It may be that we're not getting comments, but it's also just as likely that something's going on with the chat function. It could be a technical error, but I'll interject. I'll stop you if I see one.
Okay, awesome. That sounds good.
As long as you're cool with that.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I'll just share. I'm going to share kind of one idea for each of the 3Fs. And if you're following along in the chat and you'd like, you're welcome to share your own ideas. If you go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, what are some of your go-tos? And like we talked about in the beginning of the presentation, the ideas that I share, it's just going to be one idea. So there's no perfect response for any of these things, just a kind of ideas to get your brain sort of thinking about some options, other options when we're getting close to that fight, flight, or freeze mode. So basically just take what fits for you and leave the rest. All three ideas might not fit, but that might start you thinking about actually what does work for me, or maybe one or two of the ideas will fit, and that's cool too. So when I think about fight mode, one of the options, one of the ideas I have, if that almond in your brain is telling you you need to fight, and it's not a situation where there really is that sort of big physical threat like a tiger, one of the options that you have would be to kind of take a break from the scenario, right? You know, if you're the type of person that likes to go for a run or likes to do, you know, those kinds of physical things, that's an option you could try out. But basically, if you imagine if you were faced with a tiger, you wouldn't really make the choice to turn and walk away because it wouldn't be safe. And so by doing an action like that, what you're doing is you're letting your system know, okay, there's no tiger here. And that doesn't necessarily mean that what's happening is okay. It doesn't mean that you might not want to set some boundaries around what's ever happening or things like that. But what it means is that you're letting your system know that you're not in threat so that you can address whatever situation in a way that might be a little bit more productive rather than going into that fight mode. If you're the type of person that when you see a tiger, you want to lace up your sneakers and get the heck out of there, if you go into flight mode, one option that you have is to try out the activity that we started off when I asked the question of look around the room and see if you can find something that's your favorite color. If you're in flight mode, that can be something that can be helpful. Just look around the room, look to the left and look to the right and see if you can find something that's your favorite color or something that's a color that you like. And so if we imagine again, if we're faced with a tiger, we're not going to be looking around the jungle to see if we can see something that's pleasing for our eye or something that's nice to look at. And so by doing that, you're doing the same thing. You're giving your system the information that there's no tiger here. If you're the type of person that your brain might have a hard time making up the decision, do I fight or do I run away? And you go into that freeze mode. Another option would be to do some kind of gentle movement. And so in fight mode, I said maybe go for a run. If you're in freeze mode, it would probably feel pretty hard to go for a run because your whole system is trying to hold perfectly still. But you could do some type of gentle movement. And so it might even just look like if you're able to, even to just get some, go out the front door of your building and get some fresh air, right? Or sitting on, you can't see it, but I'm sitting on an exercise ball right now. So if you could sit on an exercise ball, if you have one of those, you could kind of just move back and forth like this, right? And there's different, if you're a yoga kind of person, there's all kinds of different yoga poses you could do, but just doing some kind of gentle movement just to let your system know that it's okay to move. Because truly, if there was a tiger in front of you and you were trying to hold perfectly still, you wouldn't be moving around like this. Right? You wouldn't be trying to get to the front door of your building to get some fresh air because it would make sense to hold perfectly still. And so these are just ways that we can use those other parts of our brains to help that little almond know that there's no real physical threat here. And sometimes when I do this presentation, people will ask questions like, so Jessica, are you telling me that, if I'm in a tough situation, I need to just, take a break and walk away, or I need to just look around the room? And so I just want to put a reminder out there that we're not talking about situations where there truly is a threat, right? If you're about to get schmucked by a bus or hit by a car or something as you step onto the sidewalk, you don't want to use that as your time to start looking around and making sure that there's a color you like in the area. Of course, you would take a step back, right? If there's a real threat to your safety in some way, then there's other options for that type of stuff. This is more for the situations where you're pretty sure it's not an actual threat, but there's a part of your brain that's acting like it is. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Yeah. And like I said, if you have any other ideas, those were just 3 simple ideas, but if you have any other ideas that you'd like to share, we'd love to see them in the chat. And I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it one more time, that after the live stream is done, we won't be able to respond in the chats anymore. So if you're watching this after it's already been recorded, then we won't be able to respond to those things, but we're still live now. So if you have some ideas you'd like to share, we'd love to see them.
So I think we'll just give people a little bit of time because there is a lag. Again, not confident that the chat function's working. So if it's not, I do apologize to anyone out there trying to get a question answered. So I'll just give a little bit of space because you've given us a ton of great information. So give people a little bit of space to just digest that, sit with that, maybe formulate a question if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And one thing that was coming up for me is just a thought of trigger. So if you know your tigers, if you know what your triggers are, do you just have to live with them? Just accept them? Or is this what's helpful? Like these are what you're talking about?
That's a really good question, Brian. So I'll share my idea, and I'm sure you've got some ideas you could add too. And that's a question I get asked a lot. Well, it's great, Jessica. Thanks. Great information. I've just got all these tigers all over the place, and now I just have to live with them. And my idea about that is that maybe just kind of figuring out what's tigers and what's not tigers, kind of like what we talked about today. That might be the starting point, right? That might be a good place to start. And starting to figure out, when does that little almond in your brain start to act up? Sometimes you might have heard the phrase triggers. That's kind of what we're talking about, is if I'm triggered, then it kind of means that my brain is telling me there's a tiger when there's no tiger there. And so as we start to get some awareness around our triggers, that gives us a little bit more power because we can kind of understand them better. And sometimes for some people, that's enough, just understanding, okay, yeah, when that happens, I get really triggered. For some people, that's enough. But for other people, there's other types of things that they like to do. So if you're finding that those triggers are just a little bit more sticky, and once you identify them, you can't talk yourself through them kind of as simply as we've described it being here, then another option would be to connect with different types of supports to help you work through that stuff. So it might look like connecting with some of the supports FCSS has to offer, like the counseling supports, or depending on what the triggers are, you might want to connect with some parenting supports or supports for seniors, that kind of stuff. You can also connect with like spiritual leaders are really great people to work with if you're connected to somebody in your spiritual community to start working through this stuff, or if you have an elder or somebody like that, or some kind of mentor. And even things like peer support groups and just kind of connecting with people who can let you know that, yeah, you're not the only person who experiences that. Sometimes that can reduce some of the distress around some of this tiger stuff that we've been talking about. So there's lots of different options. And we have the phone numbers for FCSS up here on the screen. So you're welcome to connect with us if there's some of what we're talking about you're relating to and just not quite sure what the next steps might be. And you're welcome to connect even just to find out other resources in the community if what we have to offer isn't really what you're looking for.
Nice, thanks. Potentially worth exploring, but it sounds like this is not uncommon.
No. I was having some of these experiences even just as we were setting up the tech stuff. Probably if you're watching the recorded version, you'll be able to see some of these responses in me even as we sort of troubleshooted some of the different technical glitches that were happening. And there was definitely no tiger there. It was just kind of the stress that comes along with trying something new that can be sort of seen by people.
That's the next session is going to be going through that footage in slow-mo to point out your almond reactions.
Right. Yeah, it's funny that you make that joke, but actually, Brian, maybe you could talk a little bit about what our next session will be, because Brian will actually be the presenter that we see for our next FCSS Live.
So next we'll be talking about the whole idea of what we're trying to do throughout the summer is just giving some tips and some information on stress, managing stress, just those feelings that can well up in us. And so Jessica's done a great job of giving us an idea of what's happening in the brain. I'll do my best to add to that. And so what I was hoping to talk about is just looking a little bit further at how each individual experiences stress, because it's different for everyone, and just finding ways to potentially take take a measure or a gauge or get some sort of idea of how much stress we're carrying. And I think if I can just go a little bit further with that, I think what brought it on is just going through this recent pandemic is that we're at home, we can just feel like, okay, I'm kind of floating through, and that stress can build on us in a sneaky sort of way. We don't need a pandemic to have sneaky stress come up, but it's just something that likely a lot of us are experiencing. And so just a way to sort of gauge how much stress am I actually carrying and what kind of impact might that be having on me and how I'm just going through life.
Nice. Yeah, when I was listening to you kind of explain that, Brian, the idea of the new normal was coming up for me. I know that's a phrase I hear a lot. It's like lots in social media and all kinds of places you hear this idea of the new normal. And so sometimes I can be like, well, why am I so stressed? Like, this is the new normal. I just have to get used to it. So I'm super curious to see what you have to say when we connect for the next FCSS Live, because it's kind of a fine balance between accepting the new normal, but also acknowledging that it's difficult at the same time, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't have comments coming up, so I'll just kind of turn it over to you to let you wrap up or tie the loose ends, whatever feels right for you.
Right. Okay, cool. Thanks, Brian. Okay, well, thank you again for those of you who tuned in to see the live stream today. And please keep checking out the live streams. I know today's had kind of a rough start, but I feel like we're perfecting the process sort of one live stream at a time. So please keep checking out the live streams. And like I said, you can check out our website, fcss.ca, and our Instagram, our Facebook, our Twitter, to find out what the dates are for the next presentations and what the topics will be. If there's topics you're curious about that you just won't be able to tune in when the live stream happens, then you're welcome to just watch for the recording that will be uploaded to the YouTube page. And if there's parts of today that you'd like to view again, or maybe you only got to see a part of it, but you're curious about the whole video, then you'll be able to see that on our YouTube page as well. And I'll just put this screen back up here again. If you're just looking for options, needing some ideas for supports, these are some options that are available in our area. And so if you try to contact any of these numbers and the number doesn't work for some reason, or there's no answer, then you could always try to call the number again or just look up resources in your area. And you're also welcome to call FCSS. Even if we don't have the service that you're looking for, we'll have people that are happy to get you connected to the resource that's right for you. So just know that you're not alone if you're having any difficulties. Yeah, and please, like I said, we'd love to have some more viewers for our next presentations. And thank you, Brian, for moderating for me today. And thank you to those of you who tuned in to our presentation today. And we're really excited to just keep offering these live streams. Yeah, Brian, anything you can think of that I missed or anything that you would add?
No, I think you've done a beautiful job, and I'll just say thank you as well and look forward to the next one.
Yeah. And I'll just put this screen up here one more time. And so this would be a question you could answer in the chat. And even if you're watching after the fact, watching the recorded video, we'd love to hear what stood out for you from the presentation. Or if you're watching this presentation, or if you've seen a couple presentations from us and you have some ideas about what you'd really love to see from us as presenters, then yeah, we'd love to see in the chat. So our checkout question as you kind of wrap up watching the presentation would be, what was something you were reminded of today or you learned today that was interesting to you or was helpful in some way? So yeah, if you have feedback, oh, it says, please visit the link in the description, but we don't actually have a link for the survey about the presentation. But if you have any feedback for us, please feel free to leave feedback in the chats, or you can leave feedback also through our website at fcss.ca.